Hello, listeners. My name is Kara Brighton, and I'm the Education and Community Engagement Coordinator at the Hult Center for the Performing Arts. Welcome to our second season of the Hult Center's Community Conversation podcast, where we go a little deeper by interviewing community members on subjects related to select performances. All past conversations can be found on the Hult Center's blog page. Today, I will be talking with Dr. Andrea Gilroy, owner of Books with Picture Eugene, to discuss representation in comics as it relates to Spider-Man. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse live in concert will be at the Hult Center on Friday, October 18th at 8 p.m. To begin, I do have to share that my 4-year-old is a huge fan of Spider-Man. And I've never really been a superhero or comic person. However, I did recently come to check out Books with Pictures' new spot in the 5th Street Market. And I felt so welcomed. It was just, it really, from the first moment walking in, just felt really good in that space. It was so bright and colorful and welcoming. And I did also have a chance to talk with Andrea and Ray, one of the employees there. And I left with a deeper appreciation for the art form and the importance of Spider-Man. I even purchased a new Spider-Man graphic novel for my kid, and we've been enjoying reading it together. In addition, I got Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse from the Lucky Days shelf at the library. And we watched it as a family, and it was just such a beautiful film. And all that to say, I feel like I'm a budding fan of Spider-Man and excited for this conversation. So welcome, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to speak to me today. So I'm just going to jump in with some questions.
Sure thing, yeah.
Can you begin by sharing a bit about yourself and how you got into the comic industry?
Yeah, excuse me. I have loved comics since I was a kid. I don't remember, the first time I read one. I think that it was probably more like Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes collections than, say, comic books. But I was a little kid who loved to read and loved to draw. And so when I sort of discovered that there was this thing that was both of those things, it was kind of a magical experience. I was about 8 to 10 when the big early 90s kind of boom in comics happened, where comics suddenly got really collectible and hot again for a minute. Superman died, and that was a big deal. And, Peter Parker had this whole clone saga thing. And this particular storyline is now generally hated by fans, probably rightly. But as a 8-year-old, it was the most intense and dramatic thing I had ever read in my life. What do you mean? There's 2 of them, and one of them's real and one of them's not. And yeah. But I kind of fell out of reading comics regularly in high school, but I moved to manga. Manga was a really big deal. By the time I was in high school, it was in that sort of first curve of the big manga explosion in the US. And so I was still reading comics, but, I thought I would have corrected somebody if they said you were reading comics. Now I wouldn't, but then I did.
Yeah.
And as sort of time passed again, I had a local comic shop that was really great. And in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a shout out to the Vault of Midnight. And by the time I was sort of done with college and moving into what I wanted to do, and I wanted to go to grad school, I started reading more and different comics, graphic novels that had been created in that time, since I wasn't really paying attention to stuff being made in the US. Always. And so when I wanted to go to grad school, I did my undergraduate degree in English and a minor in Japanese. And I wanted to study popular culture, and particularly kind of the overlaps of American and Japanese popular culture. I applied to a bunch of different schools, and I ended up getting accepted and getting a fellowship at University of Oregon. And when I came here, it turns out that Dr. Ben Saunders had, like, just within that year or within the year that I arrived, started a comics and cartoon studies minor program that he was sort of building, which I didn't know. There were other reasons why I had been attracted to I was in the comparative literature department, not in the English department. And was really excited to find this out, and was thrilled and so lucky to get to work with Dr. Saunders, both as a student and a mentor, and then to help, like, teach classes in that department as time went on.
Oh, wow.
I graduated with my PhD in 2015, which is yeah, it just feels like it must be so much longer ago, and also it's not so long ago.
Yeah.
Almost 10 years ago, and was an adjunct for a while. I specialized in comics. What I ended up writing about for my dissertation was about comics and representation, and particularly of aspects of identity, and how the comics form is particularly apt or skilled for like those kinds of explorations. I taught some courses here at U of O. I taught some courses at PSU, but after a couple of years of the adjunct grind, I was feeling really frustrated, and that I loved the teaching, but a lot of the other stuff was just really, really, it was kind of wearing on me, and it was affecting the way that I felt like I was dealing with my students. And that was like, oh, I gotta figure something out, because that's not what I want to do. At the same time, my friend Katie Pride in Portland had founded her comic shop, Books with Pictures, in 2016. And I got to know her pretty well, like, the following year. And so here we are in about 2018, 2019, talking. And she mentions, sort of importantly, we were at a Janelle Monáe concert, because that just feels correct to everything in in the scheme of things. Waiting for the show to start. And she says, if I ever opened a second comic shop, I think you should run it. And I think you should run it in Eugene. And I was like, excuse me, I've kind of been thinking about, like, shifting, and I still love comics, and I've made all these connections in the comics industry through these years. And so we continued to talk about it. And by sort of summer and fall of 2019, we got to sort of putting all the official paperwork together, and then opened the shop in March of 2020.
Dun dun.
Dun dun dun. Yeah. But we're still here, and we're still growing, and still we just moved, as you mentioned, into Fifth Street Market. We were downtown for about 4 years before that. And it's not an easy job. It's not an easy industry. Retail in general is always very tricky, but I really do love it. And I've been having a lot of fun. And, one of the only reasons that we survived opening literally 10 days before the COVID shutdowns is because people in the community responded and support us. And that means the world to me. And I take that sort of very seriously. I take that as a real honor. And yeah, so we keep going.
Wonderful. I love hearing where you've been, where you're going next, and all of this. And congratulations on the new space.
Thank you.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
So, follow-up question is, what is your favorite part of this work?
My favorite part is definitely, like, interacting with the people who come into the store. Obviously, in any kind of retail, it's always like a fraught experience, because you want to be authentic and cool and create a connection, but you're also selling somebody something. And so there's this kind of weird thing to it. But the way that, like, comics come out pretty regularly. So if somebody is collecting a monthly comic, you see them, at least once a month, if not more regularly, if they're in a couple of different series. And you can really build these relationships with folks and figure out what they like and what they don't like, and talk about it, and kind of share this sort of mutual fandom where somebody comes in and has never read a comic before, and you can get them excited about something and make a connection based on other things that they like. And And then, when that person comes back and is like, that was really great. Like, I loved it. Thanks. Like, what else should I read? Or also like somebody who comes in and like some weird, obscure thing that you just happen to know about, and you get to have this like really beautiful moment of connection. I think one of the reasons that I love media and that I was an English major and a comparative literature person and all of these things is that like it creates such a space for people to connect that doesn't necessarily have to be like an intimate and personal thing. It doesn't have to be like, well, we're sharing these deep details of our lives, but still creates like a real connection, and you can like learn about somebody and feel connected to them and understand at least a part of them because of this shared language of some sort of media that you both love. And it just never gets old, really.
Oh, yes. I love that. That's so, yeah, I love that for you. I love that for everyone. It's like, find the thing that doesn't get old, at the end of the day. So I'd love to hear more about your store, Books with Pictures. What are your guiding philosophies?
Yeah. We sort of sum up everything by saying comics are for everyone. That's kind of our core guiding philosophy, which can go a couple of different ways, including that there really are comics for everyone, right? There are comics for people who are just getting started reading, to people who are long-term, very learned, want things that are really high level, and everything in between. There's a notion sometimes, I think, that comics are for a specific set of people, whether that's kids or people who like superhero books or something. And they're not. They really are for everyone. But also in the sense that everyone should feel welcome and but also in the sense that everyone should feel welcome in coming into a comic book store. There are, as with everything, of course, big culture war fights about comics and how they're changing and all this kind of stuff. And our belief is that no, comics are for everyone. Mm-hmm. Everyone should be able to feel safe and welcome in a space that specializes in comics and graphic novels. It doesn't have to be a kind of Big Bang Theory or Simpsons comic shop space where if you don't know enough, or if you don't know the right things or the right names, then, get out of here. We don't want you. I'm thrilled to be able to show you around or tell you about new things. That's great. At the same time, like, are you a super detailed hyper nerd? Like, good, let's nerd out. It's a good time for everyone. So that's sort of what guides us. And then like underneath that is a sort of set of how we implement that, which one is that community is very important, that we work better together, that it's when we're a part of the community and the community is part of us, that's something that's going to keep us sustained in the long term. That representation matters, that it matters to people to see themselves in stories. And it matters to people to see other kinds of people in stories as well. And we're also very dedicated, in part because of my own background, to education. So, like, can we help you learn more about comics? Can I help you teach comics? Can I help kids know about comics and comics characters and comics history and all of this cool stuff? And those are sort of how we kind of guide that idea that comics are for everyone.
Wonderful. Yeah, I saw, I've been following you on Instagram, and I saw that you had like a story time.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is great. I could come.
We have two. We do one that is hosted by Queer Eugene called Rainbow Reads. And then we do one with the shop dog, George. Ray's puppy is a very good shop dog. And the kids love him. And so after much request, we decided to start doing a story time with George as well. So, yeah.
Yes. Awesome. Keep them coming. That's great. Well, we don't have a ton of time left, so I'd love to shift gears into Spider-Man discussions. So one thing that really spoke to me after talking with Ray is the idea that Spider-Man is the hero of the people. And specifically talk about Miles Morales as another Superman versus the Peter Parker many of us grew up with. Can you go into more about that and the history of how this character came to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story, and it starts, of course, in 1961 with the original Spider-Man, Peter Parker, as you mentioned, created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. And I think it's really funny if you go back and read the really early stuff, because that idea of like the nerdy Peter Parker comes through a little stronger. He's not as funny and clever. He's kind of a mean nerd in the very early issues. But that kind of changes over time. And relatively shortly, he becomes this kind of wisecracking every man. You know, from a lower income area, has lost his biological parents, has lost one of his adoptive parents, you know, can't afford going to a good school, even though he's really smart and all this kind of stuff. So we have that sort of Peter Parker character that becomes very established. And one of the things that I think really endears people to him, because, you know, there's plenty of clever superheroes around and superheroes with tragic backstories, is that he's sort of always dealing with this question of, is he doing the right thing?
Right.
Not because he doesn't think, like, is it the right thing or not to help people, but because, as he sort of discovers, we see a lot of his personal life, and there's a lot of fallout in his personal life from the kind of choices that he makes as a superhero, right? Might be putting his girlfriend in danger, or his aunt in danger, or how is he supposed to, like, teach and also be a superhero? This is going to be really hard for him in grad school, that kind of thing. And so he's constantly kind of giving up his superhero-ness and then taking it back because he can't not do it. No. So there's this kind of like anxious compulsion that I think a lot of us probably, if it's not being a superhero, it's something that we kind of we appreciate that. He's not doubting himself because he's like some dark guy who, you know, also is some kind of terrible anti-hero who also does bad things. He's doubting himself because it's really hard and he doesn't know what to do, or if the right thing is actually the right thing in the long run. And he just becomes one of the most beloved characters, I think, in all of superheroes, because he feels very real and very grounded. In the early 2000s, a writer by the name of Brian Bendis, who's Portland-based, actually, is part of a movement in the Marvel Comics. So this is now, you know, almost 40 years after the original appearance of Peter Parker, and many, many stories have happened, and all sorts of things have changed. And how do you keep track of everything that's happened? Marvel launches this thing called the Ultimate Comics line that sort of retells the stories of their most classic heroes through a more contemporary lens. So it's a little condensed, it's a little up to date. You know, you're looking at newer artists and newer writers. And Bendis takes on Ultimate Spider-Man, which originally is a Peter Parker story, and is very popular. It's great if you're a Spider-Man fan. It's a fantastic sort of retelling of all of those classic stories at a more modern pace and with a more modern voice. And this was quite popular, but in about 2011 they wanted to switch up that line because the condensed modern line was now 11 years old and had its whole own kind of thing. So there's an event in which Peter Parker is going to die, and somebody else is going to take over his shoes in this ultimate universe. As we just sort of get in the Spider-Verse, the Ultimate Universe is a multiverse. It's a different universe than the main universe. So Peter Parker dying in Ultimate Spider-Man doesn't mean that Peter Parker is dying in Amazing Spider-Man. Although if you read the news articles at the time, this was not well explained to some people. But there was an editorial decision based on a couple of factors that whoever replaced Peter Parker should be something a little bit different. And if you read interviews with either Brian Bendis or Axel Alonso, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time, a couple of the factors were one, in 2008, Barack Obama was elected president, so we had a black president, but there was this much smaller representation of people of color in the superhero roster. Another comic artist named Mark Bernardin also writes that, like, in an op-ed piece, that like the shifting demographics and reality of New York City is such that like a poor kid born in that part of New York today would not be a white kid, right? He would probably be a black kid or a Latino kid, and that would make more sense for this kind of story. Someone responds to that, saying Donald Glover should be the next Spider-Man, which Donald Glover kind of picks up and plays with, but then it kind of becomes a serious gambit because they're recasting the Spider-Man movies with Andrew Garfield at the same time, which Brian Bendis, the writer, sees all of this conversation happening and is like, I would actually like to read that story of Donald Glover as Spider-Man. So all of this kind of coalesces into deciding to create Miles Morales, who is his father is black, his mother is Puerto Rican, young kid from New York City. One of the important things, I think, is that Spider-Man kind of gets aged up, and it's easy to forget that in the very early Spider-Man, he's in like a sophomore in high school. So this brings the Spider-Man back to being very young. Miles is about 13 in the first comic appearance in 2011. And his concerns are different. Both the way that his family is structured, his place in the world, including taking over the mantle from somebody who was very famous and well-loved. As we see in the first movie, this is a struggle. But he's still like a nerdy kid with anxiety who just wants to do what's right. And as I think that the first movie kind of puts a real note on Into the Spider-Verse, the thing about Spider-Man's mask is that who he is in real life is always a big question, because you don't know who it is under the mask. It could be anybody. And so why can't it be anybody? It becomes kind of that response to that. Why can't we make it somebody who doesn't look like Peter Parker, who has a different experience? Because once the Spider-Man suit is on, we don't know. It could be anybody. And that started the new Miles Morales line of Spider-Man. It has been confusing, and I won't get into the details of what's happened since then. He's currently a vampire. In the comics anyway.
Yeah.
But now also exists in the same universe as Peter Parker. He's come back into the main universe through a whole, again, convoluted series of comic books things. But remains a really popular character. New characters get created all the time. A lot of them are one-offs or created and forgotten. And I think like really two, now three characters that have been created since the 2000s that have really actually kept going. One is Miss Marvel, and Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. And then the other was Miles Morales. And I think recently we can say that Spider-Gwen or Ghost Spider has also kind of taken on that mantle.
Oh, so much there. Thank you. I think for our comic fans out there, especially Spider-Man, there's just, so much you just shared. So thank you for going into all of that.
People are probably yelling at me for what I left out, but
okay. It's all right. It's just like, we don't have enough time. No. And I know you have a podcast as well. So maybe that's something to
shout out.
Shout out for sure. So on another note, and you did mention Gwen Stacy. So when I prepare for these conversations, I love going down rabbit holes and discovering things I never knew before. And so when I was researching, there was conversation basically going around about Gwen Stacy or Ghost Spider, who really plays almost an equal role in Across the Spider-Verse, being a trans girl. And although it's never said outright in the film, there are different clues, including protect trans kids sign in her room, trans flag colors, blue, pink, and white in scenes involving her in her Spider-Verse. And I'm just curious to hear if you've heard about this, your thoughts on it, and following up, like, what does this say about superheroes and how they're evolving to be more reflective of our times?
Yeah, I have heard this, and I remember seeing the conversations around it, and I think it's a really interesting interpretation. As far as we know in the comics, that's not the case. For those who don't know, uh, Gwen Stacy as a character in the comics was Peter Parker's girlfriend before Mary Jane, and
Oh.
she died. She was killed by the Green Goblin, or technically, it's actually when Spider-Man tries to save her. He throws out a web to try and save her, and her neck snaps. So he wouldn't have had to do that if Green Goblin hadn't thrown her off the bridge. But nonetheless, this is one of the many things that adds to his guilt. So we don't see much of that because we don't get much of Peter's backstory in Into the Spider-Verse. But this is who this character is. And so she already exists as this kind of multiversal, interesting character in that in her multiverse, she's the one who gets bit by the spider. Her Peter Parker dies. And she's sort of dealing with the fallout from that. So we already have, like, we're playing into this notion of the multiverse and what happens if something just goes slightly differently. And I think the multiverse is really a fascinating concept. People, I think, have been asking for a couple of years why we're suddenly so obsessed with this idea of multiple universes. It's not just across the Spider-Verse, it's also in other Marvel stuff and in, like, Everything Everywhere All at Once, for example. And I think, like, we are bombarded with a world of so many opportunities and so many possibilities. It is a very fascinating experiment to think, well, what if what I did changed everything? And the multiverse allows us to explore that kind of idea. In that, on the one hand, it might change nothing. Like, you are just a cog in a machine. Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that goes on in the conversations, for example, between Miguel O'Hara in Across the Spider-Verse and in Miles, is that there are things that are going to happen and you can't change them, and there's nothing you can do about it. But we are at the same point presented with this possibility that everything that you do matters enough that it creates an entirely different universe. And so that really, I think, opens up. I think it's one of the reasons that people have identified so deeply with the Spider-Verse movies and this particular story, because it's not just the idea that was sort of inherent that we get into the Spider-Verse that anybody could put on the mask and be Spider-Man. We don't know. We don't know anything about who is doing these actions. Anybody can, and anybody can make that choice. But then, all right, so what happens when I make my choice? But it allows a sort of infinite possibility of who gets to be that person and what the worlds look like when those people make those choices. How does it change? How is it the same? We don't know. And some people look at that and get really scared, like Miguel O'Hara or lots of people, because they want to protect what they have. And other people look at it and see it as a really freeing possibility of, well, okay, like, let's see what we can do. Maybe we can. Maybe there's a universe in which these things that we dream can happen. So, yeah, I mean, I think that it makes absolute sense that queer folks and trans folks would identify with these kinds of questions, these kinds of self-doubts and questions, particularly, I think, with questions of identity, like what would happen in the world where I didn't choose to express myself or become who I am. That would be an entirely different world. And it's just a really valuable metaphor, I think, in our day and age. And I love that reading. I think it's really fun. I think it's neat, and it's certainly, with all of my proper literary scholar credentials, I think that there's enough in the text to support that reading.
Awesome! Wow, you took that in such a different direction. I really appreciate it, and the times we live in. I think. I mean, you said it so well. Yeah, how the things we do, like, how do they impact, the future?
I mean, because part of the superhero fantasy in general, I think, for all of humans, and why this figure is so impactful for us is that we all feel kind of weak and at the mercy of the world around us. And what if we had the power? It is, a power fantasy in that way. What if I could do the things that I can't do? How could I change the world? What would make it right? What would I do? What kind of sacrifices would I make or not be willing to make? And I think in our world, especially, we are with that all the time because we're bombarded with all this information, and told how all of our actions are having all of these huge effects that are way beyond anything we could imagine. It doesn't feel like that, though, right? Like, when we think about like microplastics or something, it's like, I'm just trying to wash my hair. I don't make the great plastic island in the ocean bigger, and yet somehow they're connected. And so we want to imagine a world in which we might have some control over those choices, or we might be able to more clearly see the connection between our actions and the world around us. And the Spider-Verse movies do it really good. They do it really, really good.
Awesome. So just last question is, so what is the future you would like to see as it relates to the world of comics and superhero culture? If you could, make a change for the future. Weird.
What's in my multiverse?
Yeah, what's in your multiverse? Yeah.
I think that we're on the way. I think that what I would like is to see more people feeling comfortable, more people feeling represented, and more people making comics. It is better than it has ever been in terms of representation and diversity, both in the kinds of comics that get made, who they get made for, who's making them, who's represented on the page. But there's a backlash. It's a pattern that I'm sure many people are familiar with from many different media, and it's in comics too. Anytime a new movie or show or a new series comes out that has characters who are queer or women or people of color, there's this, well, you're just going woke and et cetera, and it's not. And I don't think that it's actually moving the needle, but it's very loud. And I think that can make people feel unwelcome and unsafe, and that's a real problem. Because characters like Miles Morales are still around. It might be hard to imagine it now because he is so entrenched in our culture, and particularly I think the Spider-Verse movies made him even more so. But there was a lot of those kinds of arguments happening early in the days of the creation of Miles Morales. That you're killing Peter Parker to bring us some new, diverse Spider-Man that we don't want or need. And it's like, well, no, like, first of all, no. And second of all, like, you've had 56 years of Spider-Man as Peter Parker. Can we have a couple of something different? It's okay. We're not taking away the old years. We didn't delete all those comics. They're still there. So I think just a continued growth in that direction is really, really important, because the more people there are to drown out those kinds of, regressive backlashes, the less and less they matter.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I hope this, comes to be, continues to be, and wonderful.
I don't know if that's too explicitly political or not, but
no. It's okay here. This is a safe space for that. And just to close out, I mean, are there any upcoming events you'd like to share, or anything else while we have you?
Yeah, we're kind of always doing stuff at the shop. Our next big event is a signing, going to be in the end of October 30th, the first night of the Haunted Market. We have Casey Gilly and Robin Robinson coming down. They did a book called Goth Parenting, which is really adorable and amazing. And they're going to be signing the book in the store. So that'll be a lot of fun. But in the meantime, we do regular book clubs. We've got one coming up this week that I'm really excited about. And we post all of it on our social media.
So you can check out our Instagram or our Facebook page. And we're trying to always do something. We've always got a little something in the coals. So at the very least, just come by and see the shop and take a look and talk with us about what you might be into.
Absolutely. Even someone like me who is not that, but I was like, this is great. I'm into this. Yeah.
That's right. We got you.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for speaking with me, Andrea. If you are listening, we do hope you come to check out Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse live in concert on October 18th. Tickets are available for purchase on our website, hultcenter.org, or in person at the box office. Thanks again.